reptilians, fairy folk, the elven houses, and how all of these things are connected with the conspiracies that are shrouding the earth today. We have a very interesting conversation we're going to share with you today. I had the opportunity to sit down with best-selling author Gary Wayne, the author of the book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, and we did a behind-the-scenes interview for our premium section that was just for our premium members, but I thought this was so interesting, I wanted to be able to share it with you as well. If you would like to be a premium member, we've got tons of uncensored content with all of the guests that we have on Encounter Today. You can get more information about that at encountertoday.com, but let's dive into this interview with Gary Wayne. Hello, Encounter family. So good to see you on the premium page. And thank you for supporting us and helping us be a blessing to the persecuted church around the world. Actually, we just got news that there was an attack, and you need to watch the message we did on Ephesus at our YouTube channel, where hopefully I'll go into some details on that attack in one of our churches and people that we know in Pakistan. And being a premium member helps us bring support and relief and strength to those who are suffering around the world. So thank you for standing in faith with us. And joining us here is the scholar, researcher, author. Author is an understatement when you look at this amazing book here, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy: How Secret Societies and the Descendants of Giants Plan to Enslave Humankind. A book everybody needs in their library. Part 1 and Part 2 has just come out. Gary Wayne, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you. Glad to be back.
Well, one of the things we talk about is we always want to stay anchored in the Word, right? We always want to stay anchored in the Word. You've done an amazing job, though, of going into extra biblical sources and seeing what they believe, because it's really important to understand what they teach, what they believe, and a lot of the legends that are out there have some connection with the Word. And as far as some of the fringe elements that people may consider fringe, at least, are things like reptilians, fairy folk, Atlantis, the elven houses. Now we're getting into Lord of the Rings. Yeah. So let's kind of do a rapid fire if we can, and whatever order you want to go in. I want to talk about reptilians, fairies, Atlantis, and elves. What are they, and what are we to make of these things?
Yeah, some very, very good questions. So we don't have to believe what the polytheists believe. We need to understand they believe it, and it's what they do with that belief system that we need to understand, so that we can understand what's going to come at us if indeed we're in the fig tree generation, and I think that we probably are. So let's start with the reptilians. So that's got a few different sort of angles to it. So the first reptilian that we're kind of introduced in the Bible to is the Nahash, or the serpent in Eden.
Yeah.
And the serpent is this walking, talking, intelligent human being. And Nahash is rooted in another Hebrew word that means a necromancer, a sorcerer, words like that. So already
what
been
do you
corrupt.
mean walking, talking, intelligent human being? Just hold a second.
I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. Being, not human.
Okay.
Serpentine being.
Gotcha.
Yes.
Yeah.
And we know that this being is probably created on day 6, and if it is 1,000 years, let's say, earlier into it, and created before the people of day 6 as humans are. And so in Revelation 3, he's the beast of the field. So again, that fits in with the creations, with all of the creatures in day 6. And so this is the being that is changed somewhat, like losing his arms, losing his legs, losing his ability to speak, losing its intelligence, and is forced to crawl on the ground that we know today. But it was thought to be, from the Gnostic perspective, how they understand the Nahash was as tall as a camel. Giant-like, but not a giant, so larger than humans, and were the first rulers of the fallen ones with that creation in day 6. And so when they lost their position, there's speculation from the polytheist side that fallen angels didn't let them all die. So they would have saved some, just as I leave that small crack open, as we talked about in the first part of the show, that maybe some Nephilim survived the flood, or they've been recreated again after the flood. Is the other possibility. And so we get in the polytheist belief system something called elementals. And in the New Testament, we understand that as rudiments and or elementals. You'll see it translated as both, that trying to enslave us in this world. This is part of the visible hierarchy, but at a lower level than what the Nephilim and the Rephaim and the various tribes were in the Royals. And so they have this hierarchy on this earth. And there's 4 categories of elementals in the polytheist belief system. The 4th category is salamander, and they're taller than humans, but not giants. And they're generally depicted in the earth in tunnels, as you get all of these reports and rumors and stuff like that. So they could be in the tunnels, they could be in another dimension, they could be part of the alien deception as part of all these different creatures that we're going to see. And they are, if they've been recreated, they would be some form of spurious offspring like the Nephilim were, right? So that's one part of how we might have reptilians. Within the bloodlines, though, most of the giants, not all, but a lot of the giants, and what we see in the pantheons around the world is these serpentine gods, whether or not it's Quetzalcoatl as the serpent, feathered serpent god of the Quiché Maya, whether or not it is the dragon creator gods in China, whether or not it's Osiris depicted as a serpent, or the Uraeus gods or Canaan in the Middle East, or the Greek gods being depicted originally as serpents. This is understood to be a fallen watcher group that dominated the pantheons of the fallen ones at the top. And for people who aren't familiar with watcher, it does show up in the Bible. It shows up 4 times in the book of Daniel, the Hebrew word ayir, meaning watcher. And where you get a degraded watcher, where it says satir, as we would understand it, that's sa'ir, or a hairy goat god watcher. So we need to be aware of some of these things, and that the seraphim were 6-winged, serpent-faced, copper-colored, fiery angels that worked before the altar within the fiery stones. And these are the watchers that rebelled. Not all of them, but these are the ones that did rebel, populated most of the upper levels of the pantheon. And when they procreated, and they created their own oikotarians and created their serpentine look that they're worshipped as, they would pass on that DNA. And so the original kings before the flood and after the flood were depicted as serpents after their celestial mafia godfathers. And so even after the flood, they would look the same. They don't live as long. They don't have that immortal physical body. The disembodied spirit is that counterfeit immortal spirit that doesn't go to sleep like humans do and then return to heaven to remain in that matter. And so this disembodied spirit isn't allowed to sleep, but it roams the earth, or it goes to, in the belief system of the polytheists, to their heaven if they have the right knowledge to get there, or they're in the pit prison in the sides, as some of the terrible ones are talked about. And
Right.
so these are the giant kings that look like their fathers. And then after the flood, because of this change in the kind of giant, size, some of the powers, and the fertility issue, they have to intermarry. So that bloodline is going to become diluted. And over time, they lose their size and they lose that serpentine look. And so if you look at 1,000 years after the flood with Akhenaten, or Tutankhamun, as you go to a museum to see Akhenaten, just Google Akhenaten, and you're going to see that serpentine diluted face. It's a long protruding chin, high cheekbones. That's the fair look. You know, the models with the high cheekbones, except that it's got this big conical head that is there that has elongated and is huge and has no sutures in it. And these large wraparound eyes that would glow because they were the shining ones. And they would actually light up a room with that sort of look. But you can see that diluted serpentine look. And so some people believe that the Royals have a shape-shifting capability, and that they're actually still serpentine, but they give us a look through their shape-shifting capability of a human look. I don't have any evidence that that's the case. I only can make the case that serpentine look would come from their celestial mafia godfathers. And so, but the connection in the occult is that some of the other elementals, the 3 other groups that I talk about in book 1, have shape-shifting capability. So these are typically understood as offspring of the gods as well. in polytheist mythology, and there's three groups of them. And that you have good-looking ones, you have ugly ones, and you have mischievous ones. And in the ugly ones, you get these gray fairies that are understood as gnomes that in their belief system kept the knowledge, the genealogies, and the technology of the demigods and the angelic realm. And these are elemental groups again.
And these are the fairy folk.
These are the fairy folk. And I give a couple encounters in book one that if you didn't know it was a fairy gray gnome, you'd say it was a gray alien because it's identical in the descriptions. And so expect that's part of that alien mythos as well. But now that leads into this word fairy. And so it can mean these little people, but it also means the fair folk. The fair folk are Tuatha De Danann. And the Tuatha De Danann are giants before the flood and giants also again after the flood as they show up. And that these are the fair folk who control the destiny of humankind. And that if you look at like the Riders of the Sidhe, Sidhe, there's 1,000 different ways to pronounce that word. You can see an image of that, and they kind of look like the kings of the Lord of the Rings that are depicted as white elves. And in the occult system, white elves are actually larger than that. They're the giants, so the fairy folk versus the dark elves, which would be part of the little ones. So in the Lord of the Rings, you get all of those types of beings that are being talked about in the occult understanding. So the Tuatha De Danann are thought to be the oldest sort of race in the world, or in the most noble race. That Vlad the Impaler that we talked about in the first part of the show would take his genealogies back. And they're typically blonde-haired and blue-eyed with pale skin, and red hair, hazel eyes, and pale skin. And these are the most predominant traits, with the red being a little more higher in the hierarchy in terms of how they would look at those traits. And so these are what they call in the Albigensian religion and the Cathar religion, as we connect that back to the Templars as being also bloodline royals, keeping this up. That was the religion of the Templars. And they looked at the elven bloodline as the Magianic bloodline.
Okay.
So when you look at that word Albigens, that's the genealogy of Albi, and Albi means white and pale and hoary, and gens means a genealogy back to a specific Nephilim patriarch or specific patriarch, in this case, a royale. And Albigensian is the source word for that religion. And this is the elven bloodline that they like to talk about, which is understood as elf or fairy, and the bloodline of the Tuatha De Danann that would present the dragon Messiah in their bloodlines and belief system. So how does that connect back to the Bible now? And so we have a marriage that we talked about in the first half between Eliphaz and Timnah to create Amalek. And Amalek is going to be part of the intermarriage of his bloodlines into like the Mitanni dynasty, the Kassites, and you have this Horim mixture that Timnah is a Horim giant. Horim giants are red-haired, hazel-eyed, pale-skinned giants, and I make that case in book 2, versus the Amalekim and the Anakim, which were blonde-haired, blue-eyed, pale skin. And so we're having a red line, a red-haired variety bloodline started with a matriarchal pure blood to start a new dynasty. And these are the Dukes of Edom, as they're translated into English, which is a royal term. But what's interesting is it goes back to the Hebrew word aleph. And the Catholic Encyclopedia, when I looked up information in there when I was doing research on this, they referred to these bloodlines of the Alephim. So we get that I am, which is typically a suffix that I'll use for angels and for the demigod offspring, right, as the plural. And so that word Aleph is the root word for how occult writers like Gardner that I quote for in terms of one of the genealogists of the Royals, is the word that they adopt as elf. So this is a branch of those elven elf kings of this hybrid human Rephaim race, or Horim race in this particular case, that is going to try and usurp the blessings from Israel and try and wipe them from the face of the earth. And so this is the bloodline from the Western bloodlines and the allegories that they are raising up to present Antichrist for whenever that opportunity comes forward. So they take their bloodlines into two specific allegories. One is the dragon bloodline for the patriarch, and the other one is the fairy bloodline for the matriarchal bloodline. And that they believe that that gene and that blood type is passed on through the matriarch to carry on that descending descent.
And there are people and organizations, prominent organizations, people, wealthy individuals who actually believe that they're a part of that and are practicing ordering their order of events in their life to fulfill these things.
Absolutely. So you have the credigens, which is the gens of the offspring of Zeus. So those bloodlines take theirs back to the credigens from Zeus. You have the black nobility of Italy in two different formats. There's a junior and a lower, but the senior order is the Julia gens that goes back to the Caesars, like Augustus or the actual Caesar, and the senators and their bloodlines back to Romulus and Remus that are created by Greek or Roman gods, or basically just different names for the same god. And so you have these genses that are all around the world that they claim that genealogical descent from. And it's the gene that is used to create their blood type. So there's a lot of speculation that Rh negative is the bloodline of the Royals. And they say, well, you can't insert an Rh negative bloodline into the positive bloodline if it's not there. How do you insert something that's not there? It's not that, it's the genes that are inserted through the intermarriage, through the hybrids. And so O negative would be the bloodline of the Windsors, for example. And that if you look at most of the presidents, I think all but Reagan, I don't know what Trump's bloodline was or Biden's bloodline is, but they were all Rh negative bloodlines, and they take their genealogies back, has been recorded in a lot of research, back to the Plantagenet. That's the junior offshoot of the Anjou, just as the Romanovs are a junior offshoot of the Putyanin through intermarriage.
So are you suggesting, and I've heard this before, and I've never actually given it any credit, never dug any deeper into it, that all of the presidents, save one or two, were actually related?
Yeah, that's what they say.
That's what they say. When you say that you're not referring to conspiracy theorists, you're referring to the presidents themselves.
Yeah.
That's wild.
It is. But that's how they establish themselves within that culture, is the purity of your bloodline.
How they get risen to such a place of power and prominence.
Yes.
Listen, ladies and gentlemen, if you want to know more, and I know that you do, you've got to get the book where he walks you slowly through all of this. And it's highly footnoted. The Genesis 6 Conspiracy, Part 1 and Part 2. You got to get a copy. How do they find it, Gary?
Best way is through my website, is the easiest and fastest way. So genesis6conspiracy.com. Go to the buy now page. So if you want to get book one, you go to book one. There's a page for Canada, US, and international. And also you can link over to amazon.com from that buy page, amazon.ca, barnesandnoble.com, and over to Amazon for the digital copy. And if you want to buy multiple books, there's discounts for multiples. I don't have it bundled together yet. I'm still working to get that done. But if you wanted, let's say, one of each and wanted to get the discount, just buy two of one, send me an email and tell me you want one of each, and I will send you that. Or if you wanted to buy 10 and you want it split 7 and 3, or however you wanted to do it, buy 10 of one, do the same thing. I'll ship it accordingly.
Get a hard copy because you're going to want it in your library, and then also get the digital copy, which is what I did as well, so that I can search when you've got the Kindle version, you can just search a word and it'll bring it up so you can study it all throughout the book. It's tremendously well researched. Gary Wayne, thank you for doing this work.
Thank you. It's appreciated.
Hopefully we'll have you back soon.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. We'll see you next time. God bless. There's all kinds of uncensored content, deep dives into scripture, as well as into fringe topics that we normally can't get to on our normal Encounter Today program on Encounter Premium. And all you have to do is go to encountertoday.com, sign up to become a premium member, and you get access to all of these resources, and you help us minister to the persecuted church around the world and preach the gospel around the world. We can't wait to see you next time. Head over to encountertoday.com for more information.